Well, you can see that one of the important ways of checking out if it is true is if you had people who were living while these people wrote the record. In other words, today is about 15 years, I think, after Kennedy's assassination. I think if one of you decided we'll write a history of Kennedy's assassination showing how LBJ actually killed Kennedy, then there are millions of us here who would say, no, it didn't happen that way. Some of us saw it, some of us were there, some of us know people who were there. No, we know that isn't true, and the book would immediately be looked upon as a fraud. Do you see that's the same situation you had in the first century? The records of Jesus' life were being circulated from 40 to 100 AD. During that time, there were hundreds of people alive who had actually seen these events themselves. All they had to do was say, no, Mark wrote all that, it isn't true. It isn't true. In fact, you have the opposite situation. You have people like Papias, who was born in about 60 AD, and he writes and tells us of his conversations with the old white-haired John. And he tells what he discovered in those days. He said, the elder John used to say, Mark, having become Peter's interpreter, wrote accurately all that he remembered. And another man called Polycarp, who was born in 69 AD, he knew John personally also, and yet lived well into the 2nd century. And he said Polycarp would describe his intercourse with John and with the rest of those who had seen the Lord, and how he would relate their words. And whatsoever things he had heard from them about the Lord and about his miracles and about his teaching, Polycarp, as having received them from eyewitnesses of the life of the Word, would relate it altogether in accordance with the Scriptures. In other words, when John says, listen, we were eyewitnesses of these things, that's why you can trust us, you don't even have to just take his word. You can look up other history books of men that knew John and that indicate that he lived in the 1st century and that he observed the things that he observed. Of course, loved ones, the interesting thing is you don't even have to trust just the New Testament itself. You can go to people like Tacitus. He was the foremost historian of imperial Rome, and here's what he says. The author of the name Christians was Christ, who in the reign of Tiberius suffered punishment under his procurator Pontius Pilate. Another man called Tertullian, who doesn't appear in the Bible at all, was involved with the government in their archives, and he said this, Tiberius accordingly, in whose days the Christian name made its entry into the world, having himself received intelligence from Palestine of events which had clearly shown the truth of Christ's divinity, brought the matter before the Senate with his own decision in favor of Christ. The Senate, because it had not given the approval itself, rejected his approval. Caesar held to his opinion, threatening wrath against all the accusers of the Christians. A man like Josephus, who was a Jew and therefore really committed against Jesus from the point of view of Christianity, writes, there was about this time Jesus, a wise man, if it be lawful to call him a man, for he was a doer of wonderful works, a teacher of such men as to receive the truth with pleasure. He drew over to him both many of the Jews and many of the Gentiles. He was the Christ. And when Pilate, at the suggestion of the principal men amongst us, had condemned him to the cross, those that loved him at the first did not forsake him, for he appeared to them alive again on the 3rd day. And so, all that is written by the men who knew Jesus himself in this book is confirmed by hundreds of other histories that were written at the same time. And maybe the greatest reason for believing them is, did they grow rich? Did they grow prosperous and famous and live to a good old age because of what they told about this man Jesus? No. If they had been content just to say he was a good teacher, that's what would have happened. But they insisted on saying that he was the Son of God. And that's the thing that brought them onto the crucifixion hills and into the lion arenas. And loved ones, maybe the greatest argument for believing what these men said really happened is that they suffered for what they talked about. They suffered. They did not gain from it. They suffered for it. Now, men will die for a thing that they think may be true, but nobody will die for what they know is a lie. And many of us, you know, in high school days used to say, well, maybe they imagined it, maybe they made the story up. Yes, but you won't die for something you make up. You'll only die for what you know is true. In other words, if you just allow your mind to work logically, it's very, very difficult to get away from the fact that this is the most reliable history book of ancient times that we possess. And that when you read this book, you are reading actual historical records of what our Creator has done over 4,000 years of our existence. And that's why, loved ones, we believe that there is a God, because we can see how he has dealt with us, human beings, over a period of 4,000 years. And we believe that he is the Father of Jesus Christ. You yourself have to decide, of course. You have to decide if in the face of this kind of evidence, you can still reject the idea of a God. I think it's very difficult to. But you see, the evidence is now in your hands, and you must decide.